Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the FPV Academy, to Micro FPV Gear, what the doctor recommends. Yet another way of me trying to share as much as I can of the related knowledge that I have acquired over the last 6 years in flying copters and FPV things. And this is also the second and last for this cycle prelude video webinar session to my upcoming course, the Micro FPV Bootcamp, which contains around 30 concise, quick videos that cover everything you need to know to start flying FPV. And also part of that course is a weekly live session just like this one here. So the next 4 weeks of this live stream will be internal for those who have signed up for the course. If you want to do that, you can go to fpvacademy.teachable.com. So I've spent a couple of the first weeks of this year to put together this course. I've researched a lot of LMS, learn management systems, to decide which one I want to use. And I've decided for Teachable because it gives a very nice platform to publish videos, text, documents, quizzes, and all sorts of other interactive content for you. So if you want to see that, go to FPV Academy, no dashes in between, fpvacademy.teachable.com. So this hour here shall serve to prepare you for that course. If you want to learn flying FPV together with me, that will give you an overview what hardware I'm using in that course, what hardware I'm suggesting you to use to learn flying FPV. That includes goggles, screens, transmitters, models obviously, and chargers and batteries. And there's a huge choice of parts available, and I want to share with you what I think are the best tools to not only start flying, but also keep flying, which means sustainable gear that grows with you. So if you have specific questions, you may join the live webinar session by entering this link into your browser. That only works if you're watching this live right now on YouTube. If you watch the recording that I will upload to YouTube afterwards, well, bad luck. You have to put up with the question that your fellow FPV mates have asked. I already see a number on the Q&A symbol down there. So let's jump right in and see what question we have here. So Larry is asking, are there any guidelines for picking props? Or to ask in a different way, say I start with 4-bladed props on a motor. What changes if I switch to 4 blades? And how about going from 3 to 2 blades, assuming the motor stays the same? That's a very good question, Larry. For most of the quads that I'm flying, 4 blades is the best compromise. In general, if you add more blades to a propeller, then you will have more thrust, but also more load on the motor. So by changing the propeller and moving to a lower blade count, you will reduce the load on the motor. The propeller is able to spin faster, and I can't really give you a definitive rule. It really depends a lot on the size of the propeller, the frame, the motor itself, the weight of the quad, and essentially what you want from that. As a general rule, for all the little quads, all the whoop-style quads we are flying, four-bladed props are usually the best compromise. See all these quads here have, oh no, here's one with three-bladed props. This is the Beta 65S stock, and I just didn't bother changing the props on them because, you know, to be honest, the difference isn't that much. You get, in this case, you get a little more efficiency on that quad. So I get up to 4 minutes of flight time on this quad, whilst if I put four-bladed props on, the flight time is slightly reduced. On the other hand, you get a little more performance. So yeah, that's basically the rundown on props. But in general, go with whatever other people recommend that have run this same setup before. So that was question number 1. If you have a question, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom client and you can put your question in there. To give you a general rundown what gear I recommend and expect you to use during the Micro FPV Bootcamp, I will quickly go through the 4 main sections of gear that we are using. I want to keep this as open as possible, so if you already have gear that's working for you, that's compatible with what we're doing, you're more than welcome to use that. However, if you are starting out and want to join that course, I would appreciate if you use something that's as close as possible to my recommendation, because then it's so much easier to get the messages across and help you getting started. So let's start with the transmitter. Probably one of the most important tools in your RC toolbox, because that, if you're making the right choice, is going to stay with you for a long time. Well, I didn't make only the right choice because I purchased an insane amount of transmitters over the past decade, and only recently transmitters have become available that are a lot more affordable and a lot more universal, compatible, adaptable, and sustainable than the old stuff that I bought back in the days. So I really like programmable transmitters, and the first programmable transmitter that I have ever purchased is this one here. So it's currently missing the stick ends because I'm using those on another transmitter. And this is a Turnigy 9XR. The faceplate is missing, and also the trims have been removed because for a multi-rotor you don't need trims. And yeah, the gimbals look so ugly because I have hacked some Aurora 9 gimbals into this transmitter because the stock gimbals have given up at some stage. Yeah, that was back in the days, somewhere 2014, I believe, or 2013 even. So, however, the key feature of this transmitter is that it's running OpenTX, which is the firmware running on this transmitter. And the main feature of that firmware is that it has a programmable mixer, which means I can decide what stick inputs are resulting in what RC command output. And I'm still a fan of this transmitter, even though it's discontinued now. At some stage, Hobby King was selling them, selling their remaining stock, I believe. And oops. Dave Purett posts, Zoom error, webinar is over, you cannot register now. Too bad, I'll post the link on YouTube afterwards. So OpenTX is the main feature here. You can program how you want to have your sticks and switches result in your RC commands. And when Hobby King was selling these the remaining stock of their transmitters, I couldn't resist and I bought a whole bunch more just in case, you know. This one here even still has the screen protector on there, and I've installed an FR-Sky module in there. I have a few more of those. If you want to have a transmitter on a budget, I'm happy to part ways now with these because I have so many other transmitters. They're big and heavy, but they have a lot of switches and potentiometers, and they also have a room in the handle where there's an antenna in there. So if you want to do some hacking, you can open up the module, drill a hole in there, and then reroute the antenna to actually use the internal antenna in the handle. Some very nice transmitters, however, they're not for sale anymore. So only the few that I have. If you want to buy a new transmitter from any of the resellers near you, I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations. So one of the modern transmitters that I recommend is this one here, the Taranis QX7, which has basically the same functionality as the very popular Taranis X9D and X9D Plus. This one here has already installed the Hall sensor gimbals, even though it is not the S version. If you want to have one with upgraded gimbals, you can buy the Taranis QX7S, which comes with different gimbals. Hall sensor means that instead of potentiometers, they're using magnets and Hall sensors to determine the position of the sticks, which means they have less friction, which makes for a smoother gimbal action, and it reduces or eliminates the wear on those, so you shouldn't see the common issues like we see on all potentiometer gimbals, that over time the quality degrades and then you get jittering and inaccuracies on your outputs. This is a very nice transmitter. It has a built-in FR-Sky module, which is a very popular RC protocol, so you can fly a lot of different models with it, and it does have a JR compatible module bay. JR is a RC manufacturer who, I don't even know if they still exist, made transmitters way back in the days, and they have come up with this format of modules, and FR-Sky has picked that up and made a module bay in that shape. So if you ever want to extend your protocol capabilities on this radio, you can buy a module, stick it in there, and then you change the settings in the radio to use that external module, and you can fly even more types of models. For example, very popular for long range flying is the TBS Crossfire module that you can put in there, or also quite useful is the module made by Jumper, which I have sticking in the back of this radio here. It's the JP 4-in-1 module, which contains 4 different RF modules, and each of them has a whole bunch of different protocols in there. So you can fly a lot of different models with this one module. Which brings me to this radio here. This is the Jumper T12, the standard version, and the difference between the standard version and the plus version next to the housing color is that the Plus version again has Hall sensor gimbals. Not really that crucial if you are a beginner. However, if you have a few bucks more to spend, it's certainly something that I would suggest you invest into. Hall sensor gimbals work nicer and work for longer. So these two radios also run OpenTX. They have a much smaller display though, and well, in general, they're a lot smaller footprint than your Tyrannus. So if you want to travel compact, that's probably a better choice. If you really want to have large gimbals, if you have large hands, maybe that's a better choice. Both of them work just fine for our purposes. And let's finish off the transmitter discussion. Unless you have questions, if you have questions about transmitters, now's the time. Hit the Q&A button at the bottom and ask them right now. This here is still my favorite transmitter, even though I have some beef with the company itself. But yeah, the transmitter itself is awesome. This is the T8SG V2 Plus, and it's a very similar housing to the T12 and T12 Plus. However, one big advantage is the screen. This is a OLED screen as opposed to the LCD screens that are on all my other transmitters. Really so much easier to read because it's not gray with a little darker gray pixels on there, but it's black with really nice bright yellow pixels on there. Very nice to read. Even in sunlight, it's readable. So, but you know, in Australia here, I usually try to sit in the shade so I'm not getting burnt. So yeah, not too much of an issue. It's really very nicely readable. And the other main difference to the T12 radios that this is here running Deviation TX, which is a different firmware, not as powerful as OpenTX, but you know, as many of us who are using OpenTX have discovered, it's quite a learning curve to get your head around OpenTX, and in the end, you're only ending up using around 2% of the features that OpenTX offers. Deviation has a couple of features less. However, the most important thing, a customizable mixer is in there as well. So I can decide what sticks, what switches are doing what, and fine-tune them exactly to my likings. And I find the menu operation on Deviation TX is a lot simpler. So I'm using OpenTX for years, but I'm still many times confused how to do things, and you need to click a lot to go through all the menu screens and then long press here and go back here, etc. It's much simpler on Deviation TX, and also it's a lot easier to set up your telemetry screens on that. So this is not having a module in there at all. This has the J4-in-1 RF modules built right in. So this radio also supports a huge array of protocols. I am mainly using the FrSky protocol to fly all my Betaflight whoops, and I'm also using it to fly a couple of the Horizon Hobby models on flying on DSM. And the third protocol that I'm frequently using is Bayang, which is used by the Ichin models and also the Beta FPV Lite and a couple of other silverware flight controllers. So using one of these transmitters will allow you to use a lot of protocols down the track, so that doesn't bring you into the problem that many of us experience when progressing in the hobby, oh, I want to buy a different model which has a different receiver, which means now I have to buy a different transmitter. So this thing flies pretty much everything. It's nice and small, fits into a bag much easier than the Taranis radios, and also it runs on a 2S LiPo battery. I've put in here a 1800 milliamp 2S LiPo. It runs on that for a couple of days non-stop. It's just zipping around 80 milliamps from the battery, also depending on what output setting you've set it to. This one is currently set to 150 milliwatt, but you can go a lot less. I'm a fan of transmitting just as much as I need to. So let's move on to topic number 2, which is a viewing device. If you want to fly FPV, you need to have some sort of a device to look at your FPV video. So can be a screen. I'm a big fan of this LCD 5802 screen, which is sold amongst other brands from Ichin. This one here I got directly from the OEM. That's why it doesn't have any branding on there. But if you Google just LCD 5802, then you find it probably from Ichin and from lots of other sellers. It's a 7-inch screen with a built-in diversity receiver, and if you choose the D version, you also get a SD card slot with a built-in DVR. And yeah, the DVR is not the best, but it works for the purpose of recording your video. And I like to record all my FPV flights, because when you crash, the recording that you have on your SD card can be an invaluable tool to go out and find your lost model. So between the recording and my trusted RF Explorer, I have never lost a quad in the jungle for more than an hour. So a screen is one option, and yeah, it's very convenient if you have a built-in receiver. If you do not have a built-in receiver, then you need an external receiver. There is quite a few options, from affordable to crazy expensive. I'm just going to show you a variety of them. So where did this one go? So that's basically covering the sort of the price range. So on the lower end of the budget, I recommend this FR623 diversity receiver from Boscam, I believe. But yeah, they're probably rebranded from a lot of other companies as well. FR632. We've used them extensively for a lot of events. That's why it still has this green stick on here, because that was channel 4. So that's a very nice budget receiver, costs around $50, and it has a diversity output, and it also has separate outputs for the 2 receivers in here. Yeah, I don't really know why you want to use that, because you can't set them to different channels. If you could set 2 receivers to different channels, you could actually use the 2 outputs for 2 people to fly. But in this case, I don't know, for diagnostic issues, diagnostic reasons, maybe. Yeah, not sure. Anyway, this is a really nice receiver. This one here lost the button, but yeah, very easy to use menu to set your channels, and quite nice performance, has diversity, which means you can have two different antennas on there, either one omni and one directional, or maybe even two directionals to point in different directions. So that's my budget recommendation for an external receiver. If you have a little more to spend, then I suggest to have a look at the Immersion RC Duo 5800. Sorry again for the mirroring issue. It's the Duo 5800 from Immersion RC, and if I remember correctly, it costs maybe around double than this one here. So just from memory, I would say around $100. And that's basically a reference model in the FPV hobby. Many people are using that, and including our good old friend Joe Scully, who has a whole array of them that he brings to his events. So that is a really nice, really sensitive receiver that works really nice. It has two AV outputs, and they both are the diversity output. So again, you have two receiver modules, you put two antennas on there, and then the receiver has a logic in there that decides which signal is stronger, and that signal is output over both of these 3.5mm TRSS connectors here, which means that you can connect two goggles, or a screen and a pair of goggles, or a recorder and a pair of goggles, etc. I like to, as I said, always record my my flights, so that's easy. One goes to the recorder, one goes to the goggles. Or what I also like to do is have a screen and a pair of goggles connected at the same time, so that I can make pre-flight checks on the screen without putting the goggle on my face. So that's kind of the in-between solid performer recommendation. Just one word of note here. Please, if you go and fly with this thing in events, then make the effort to go through the annoying menu and turn off the Geiger counter noise. The default configuration of this receiver is that whenever it changes between the two antennas, it makes a clicking noise, and it's completely useless and highly annoying. So I have done this for a while myself, and at some stage I freaked out over this and turned it off on all my Duo 5800 receivers. So yeah, please don't annoy your fellow flying mates. Turn off the Geiger counter. And then let's come to the flagship receiver in my arsenal, and I think there's nothing better out there, unfortunately also nothing more expensive than this receiver. Well, this is the racing edition. There's one more expensive version of it. It's the Pro version. I'm talking about the Clearview receivers from Iftron Tech. So yeah, sorry that I've messed it up here a little bit, the branding, by sticking a recorder on there, but I'm going to talk about that in a second as well. This is the Clearview racing receiver, and even though there's a Pro receiver, and a lot of us think that Pro should be better, no, it's not. You do not need the Pro receiver. I thought I need that, so I bought one of those as well, and it's actually this one over here, just behind that light on a tripod. That's what I'm using for my daily flying. But I have disabled the only, there's two features you get on the Pro. I'm not using any of them. So the number one feature that the Pro receiver has over the racing receiver is that it allows you to pick up competing signals quicker. So if someone else transmits on your same frequency the receiver is able to pick up that signal a lot quicker, which is not at all what you want in a racing environment. That's why this is called the racing receiver. And one of the main racing features is that it profiles the signal that it's receiving and then locks onto it and sticks to it, even if there's other competing interfering signals on the band. So if you decide to buy the Pro receiver, well, just go in there and set it to racing mode and you'll have a better experience. Another feature is a RF analyzing feature that the Pro version has. I'm not using that because that's very basic. If you want to have an RF analyzer, go and buy an RF Explorer. If you're interested in that, put a message somewhere in the chat room or into the Q&A session. By the way, I'm also reading the YouTube chat room while I speak, so you're happy to post something in there, because I have learned that you cannot join the webinar live anymore. I assume that's a mistake I made. I should have scheduled it for longer. So I will remove that link here. I should have done this earlier. You can't join me live on the webinar anymore. If you haven't done this in time, now you are stuck on YouTube. By the way, which Juxi and Mr. Tiny Whoop himself. Oh, we have prominence in the YouTube chat. I love that. Thanks for joining me, buddy. So just talking about the Clearview receivers, and I know, Jesse, that you are a big fan of them as well. The only one little tiny feature that I actually appreciate, but that's also not so necessary on the Pro receiver, is that you get a little indicator on the top showing you the signal strength. But yeah, it's not really that important. It's just kind of a geeky tool that I enjoy from time to time. However, the main feature why I love this receiver so much is that it's very, very sensitive. I'm getting way better reception with this receiver than with any other receiver, including the famous Immersion RC Duo 5800. Yeah, I'm using this thing daily. I love it. The only downside is it costs a fair penny. It has come down recently, but still I think it's somewhere in the $300 or $400 range when I'm not mistaken. They have come out with a goggle module as well, which costs less than the full-on receiver, but you need to install that into a pair of Fat Shark goggles. You lose some of the features like dual output and the ability to put it on a stick. I mean, that's less convenient to put your receiver on a stick instead of having it in your goggles, but it improves reception significantly when you're choosing the position of your receiver wisely. For example, when I fly around the house here and have the receiver in there where it stands right now, I get significantly less signal quality than I when I put it outside. So it has a couple of meters cable connected to it. So when I'm flying, I'm opening the window outside and the door outside and put this thing outside on the deck, and I can still sit in here and fly around, and signal quality improves significantly when you have direct line of sight between the antennas. So even if you do not have the budget to invest into one of these receivers, you can improve your signal quality significantly by using a budget external receiver, connect a cable between your receiver and your goggles or screen, and put it high up on a stick or further out where it can see more of your flying area. So Mr. Tiny Whoop posts in the YouTube chat room that he is a huge fan of Clearview, and I see, Jesse, that you are using the goggle module, because in some of your videos I've seen the little display on there. So they have taken some of the Pro features and put it into the lower priced goggle module. However, Jaxi says in the YouTube chat room as well, Clearview works great, but the management of the goggle module situation was shameful. I don't know the details about this, but yeah, there have been some problems apparently in the beginning of the release of the Iftron Tech Clearview FetShark goggle module, and a lot of people haven't been happy with the delays and the problems that came up with replacing those modules. However, I believe that Iftron are good and honest people, so I think they have fixed all these issues, and they even have sent me a goggle module for review for free, which I have passed on to my good old buddy Hash Brown, who has been using that, I think, in his FetShark HDOs. I think it's time to get some feedback on that. So Ash, if you're still using it, please keep using it. I don't have a pair of FetShark HDOs yet, and please tell me if you like it. If you don't like it, please give it back to me, and either bite the bullet and buy a pair of HDOs, or pass it on to someone else who might need it. Jesse says in the chat room, yeah, there were issues with their first release, but I think it's solved from what I can tell from flying the past 6 months. So here you hear it right from Mr. Tinywhoop himself. He's been using the Clearview goggle module for the past 6 months, and he's very happy with that. Jaxi says pre-orders got delayed again and again, money already taken, communication poor. In fact, they gave my email address for free to all the other customers. Amateur. So Jaxi isn't happy about it. Sorry for that experience, my friend. So that was my spill about video receivers. If you have any questions, pop them into the Q&A section. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube and cannot join the Zoom session, then you may also post them into the YouTube chat. I'm reading that as well. Moving on. Let's move to models. So even though technology has moved on, I'm still a big fan of brushed whoops like this one here. This is the Beta 65S, and it's running on a 65mm frame and uses 7x16mm motors, and I'm flying it with 255 milliamp my lipos with Jesse's face on it. So I'm just flying mostly these BNF squads right now, even though I have built hundreds and hundreds of quads over the years, because that's pretty much exactly what I would build if I would build one from scratch. Beta FPV has really been doing a good job at listening to what we want and making exactly that. This quad is running a F4 flight controller with OSD, telemetry, and S audio, and they also make a camera, the ZO2 camera, that you can just pop in there. So there's a 5-pin connector. You just have to push it in and do not have to solder all these little wires to it. So that's the previous version of the camera. Looks like that. So if you, well, I guess you can't really see this, but there's 5 little pins on this side. So you basically just push this thing on there onto the receiving connector on the flight controller, and everything is connected for you. Power, video in and out, which you need to overlay the OSD over the video, and S audio, which has nothing to do with audio except that it's using the audio input of the VTX to receive commands from the flight controller. So What that means is that you can remote control your VTX, change channels, change output power, etc. Very handy feature. So the button, this button here in the middle, hard to see on the video, that's underneath the canopy here, you don't need to use that. You can use either your sticks to control the video channel over the OSD, or you can flash it with, or dump it, configure it with settings over the Betaflight configurator and give this thing your preferred video channel right when you configure it. So I like to use setting dumps for my copters. So when I set up a new one, or when I open a new box with another BNF, I like to flash my version of the firmware and then dump the file settings onto it. And those file settings include my preferred power output and my preferred video channel. So as I said earlier, I like to transmit, that comes from my old amateur radio days. I like to transmit with just as much output power as we need. And even though these transmitters are able to transmit with 200 milliwatts, I prefer to use 25 milliwatts even when I fly by myself, and rather smarten up, position my receiver properly, choose my flight path wisely, as opposed to cranking it up to 200 milliwatts and potentially disturbing other people, and also potentially breaking the law. So if you do not have a valid radio amateur license, in most places on the world, you are not allowed to transmit with more than 25 milliwatts. So even though there's a lot more advanced BNFs that are not so much more expensive than this one out there, this is still one of my go-to models because it's so easy to put together, so easy to maintain, and so harmless. So, if you fly larger, heavier, faster quads, then this one here, there is a significantly increased chance of hurting someone. For example, if you fly one of these that, on the first glance doesn't look that much bigger, especially if you hold this one closer to the camera, then the potential of hurting someone is significantly increased. A couple of my friends have, scars on their back or on their nose from flying these quads into themselves. You don't always react quickly enough to cut the throttle, and if you are hitting something and this thing tilts in this direction, well, what is the flight controller doing? It's trying to compensate for that by spooling up this propeller. However, if this propeller is stuck in your back, then this means that you're screwing your hole in your back. And these little motors here, these are 1103 motors running on 2S. They have enough power to drill a little hole in your back, and they certainly have enough power to take an eye out. So that's one of the reasons why I still like to fly those, especially when I'm around kids, animals, and other people. The little brushed motors here and the 31mm props are really posing a lot less risk of damage and injury to people than just this little larger quad here. And if you scale it up to 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, it's very easy to hurt someone. Just look at videos where someone takes a 5-inch quad and puts a sausage in there, and then you know what's happening to your fingers. So if you're starting out, I recommend to start on a brushed quad like this one here. 7x16mm motors are my favorite. They are a little heavier than 6x15mm motors, what we have used on the OG Tiny Whoop for many years. A little larger, but they are a lot more efficient. So using this setup here, I get up to 4 minutes of flight time. I usually cut it down to 3 to save my batteries and save me from walking. So if you have questions about models, pop them down there in the Q&A section or in the YouTube comments, YouTube chat, where I'm going over in a second. There's a lot of quads out there, so this is just what I like to use and what I recommend to get started and what I recommend that you acquire if you plan to join the Micro FPV Bootcamp. So in the YouTube chat room, yes, I can tell, Jaxi, that you are upset about Wavtron Tag. Jesse says, oh yeah, I will always fly brushed. I know that, Jesse, that you are flying also brushless quads. I know that you have come up with a branded version of brushless micro motors. By the way, they look very nice in white. And still, a lot of us agree, we still come back on flying brushed copters again and again due to their harmless nature. He says, I keep several whoops in good condition with different motor speeds. Brushed will probably always be my favorite. Yep, I think a lot of us micronuts agree on that. Jaxi says, something about brushed just feels right at that size. Yeah, something about that feels just right. Beta 75X is fun, but doesn't have that feel. It totally has a different feel. So those things fly just completely different. It's almost twice the weight in that setup, even though they are lighter ones now. So, for example, this one here is the 75 Pro 2, which is running on 803 motors and has an all-in-one flight controller ESC receiver. So saves a lot of weight compared to this one, even though it is the same size. Good point here, Jesse. Lower power means more throttle resolution. Very important point if you are learning to fly FPV or copters in general. Throttle control is the most difficult thing to learn, and if you have something that has lower power, then it's obviously easier to learn. You don't put a driving beginner learner into a 500 horsepower Ferrari, because if they put their foot down, they end up in the next tree very quickly. Same with quads, FPV, it's in the tree. That's why we like to joke about, because if you don't get it right, a little punch out too much and you end up in the next tree. So lower powered motors means that your stick movement is having less of a power output, which means that it's easier to learn and understand the basics of your throttle channel. Jaxi says, I need an upgrade though. My motors are getting super noisy. What's next? BBL. I don't know what you mean by BBL, Jaxi, but that's one of the major downsides of brushed motors. They wear out over time, they get noisier, and they get unreliable. And at that point, well, you just gotta swap them out. By the way, this is one of the reasons why I like these 7x16 millimeter motors over 6x15 mil, because due to their increased efficiency, they also have a lot less wear and tear on the commutation, which is the main breaking point on these. So 7x16 millimeter motors last a lot longer. They're still rated from the factory to 5 to 6 hours, but that's just because they didn't update their ratings. I have seen them lasting for way more than 20 hours. So low quality bait, silverware or beta F4. I'm not going into too much detail here. My favorite is a Betaflight flight controller with OSD because it has an OSD. I really like to have an OSD. If silverware would have that, that would be one major reason for me to switch over, because silverware has really nice flight characteristics, doesn't have some of the washout issues that we see on brushed Betaflight boards. And reason number two is I really like to confirm that my outputs are doing what I intend them to do, or put in other words, that the commands that I give with my transmitter are actually received properly by the receiver. And one of the ways I'm doing that on the Betaflight quads is you connect this thing over USB. Here's a micro USB port to your computer. You start the Betaflight configurator, you go to the receiver tab, and then you see your stick inputs, and you can see how much jitter they have, if they're centering properly, if you have allocated them to the right channels, etc., etc. So that's my two main reasons why I'm still a big fan of Betaflight boards, even though they have their downsides. On the other hand, I'm also a big fan of the silverware quads. That, you know, it has started with the eChine E10, and then this project has been picked up by our good old friend Travis Not Fast Enough Schrock and turned into something really awesome. I could talk about this topic for an hour by itself, which I have done in the past and probably will do again, but now there's only 9 minutes left, and I want to talk about topic number 4 that you need to know about if you want to fly FPV successfully, and that is chargers. So these batteries have only a flight time on most setups somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. So if you want to fly a lot, you need a lot of batteries and you need to charge them. So what I'm using is, my main driver to charge these little batteries is this charger here, the HTRC X4 micro multi-charger. There's two more versions of them, one of them branded Sky RC and one of them branded High Tech RC. And the other two versions only charge your batteries to 4.2 volts. However, if you have 4.35 volts high voltage lithium single cell batteries, you might want to charge them to high voltage. So see those switches on here. I know it's hard to see on the video. They can switch the termination voltage between 4.2 and 4.35. So this one is charging 4 batteries independently to 4.35 volts. You can adjust the charging current, and you connect it straight to the grid, what I do on my desk over there, or you can connect them to 12 volts, which I do when I'm out there in the field with a car battery or with just a 3-cell LiPo. So, you know, a 2 or 3,000 milliamp 3-cell LiPo is usually enough to fly for as long as I want to. So this is the HTRC X4 microcharger. I really like this thing, and we resold quite a few of them. However, yeah, the manufacturer has been kind of unreliable, so I'm thinking about moving to something else. However, I'm not finished yet with my research on this one. Before I talk about this, I just want to quickly introduce you to my second favorite way of charging a lot of little batteries, and that is using adapter cables to connect a lot of single cell LiPo batteries to a multi-cell charger. So I'm using cables like these here. So they have the two main 5mm bullets to connect to a regular hobby charger, and they do have a 6S balance connector, and on the other end they have 6 PH2 connectors to charge 6 different single cell batteries. So this is a dual output charger, so using 2 of these adapter cables I can charge 12 batteries at the same time, and when I'm going to events and need to charge even more batteries, then I'm using this Turnigy Quattro charger here, which has 4 outputs, so I can charge 24 batteries, single cell batteries at the same time. So the HTRC X4 that I showed you earlier retails at around 40 to 50 bucks, and a generic hobby charger, I wouldn't buy that if you only want to charge single cell batteries, but if you already have one, just get some of these cables and you can make double use of that very easily. The next charger that I might recommend if everything turns out well is this one here. Well, this is the housing of it, because I wanted to get into the internals to check them out, and I realized a little too late that I could have just pulled the front off and taken a couple of screws out to open it up. So I've actually butchered it to a degree that it doesn't go together again. However, on the inside was this, I think so far, very nice piece of electronic that has an XT60 input, so it doesn't have a 240 volt input, which I really like on the other charger. However, that's also posing a problem for me as a reseller, because if you're selling devices that directly connect to the grid, you assume a lot more responsibility and need to provide CE certification and all sorts of other stuff that I don't have the time to do and the money, because you need to employ lawyers and whatnot to do that. So that's why I actually quite like that this thing only has a XT60 12 volt input, and it has a whole bunch of connectors all around the parameter. But just like the other one, you can only use every 4th of them. So every channel, like, this is here one channel, there's 4 connectors, a micro JST, a JST or a PH2, a Valkera low C connector, and then this JST SYP connector here. I think they're all connected in parallel, so only use one of them at a time, but if you have batteries with different connectors, you don't need adapters for them. There's 5 outputs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here, and the whole thing is controlled over a display, which you would think costs a fair penny, but actually the wholesale price is around half of what the HTRC chargers go for, and the footprint is significantly less. So these are 2 things that attract me to this charger. So if you have a look at it, this thing is significantly smaller than the HTRC X4 microcharger, and it charges 1 battery more. Over the display and the 3 buttons here, you can change between regular and high voltage, and you can also configure the current. So this way they do away with all these different displays here and all the dials here, and they also do away, and I think that's one of the main reasons why this thing is a lot smaller. It doesn't have a PSU to transform the voltage down from 240 to 12 volts or whatever it needs. So with that, we have arrived at the top of the hour. It's almost 12 o'clock midday in the Australian jungle, and started to rain again. 100% humidity around here. So I hope you enjoyed that session, and I hope I could bring some knowledge to you that that you can use to kickstart your FPV career hobby. If you're interested in learning more, this was the prelude to my online course that I call the Micro FPV Bootcamp. A few of you have already signed up for that. I appreciate that, and I see you next week at the exact same time. We will have the first of 4 internal live sessions just like that, which I dedicate to just those people who have signed up for the course. If you want to do that, you can go to fpvacademy.teachable.com and you can sign up there. You get access to a whole bunch of on-demand videos and documents and guides that I've put together. And on top of that, to make sure that all your questions are getting answered, there will be a weekly live show just like that, internally, not published on YouTube, just for you who have signed up to the course and want to kickstart your FPV career. So thanks to everyone who has joined me. Thanks everyone who has shared this video, asked questions, etc. I see you on the next one.